Hello everyone, Adam here. How's it going? So Denuvo. Denuvo is one of the most infamous services in the gaming industry, not for publishers, but for game users, basically people like me. So digital rights management is basically a service provided by people like Denuvo. There are other services out there where they make sure that your product is going through checks in order to ensure that it is a legitimate product. They have checks and balances to ensure that whatever you purchase the game, it was through legitimate means and you didn't pirate the game. To circumvent this, people cracked the game and released them as ROMs for people to enjoy for free. Now, I don't condone that. I think that if you like a game, you should purchase it directly from the company. After all, you vote for your wallet, and that's how companies gauge whether a certain product or service is worth investing into. And yes, I'll go more into this as we read this article. This is the first time I'm reading it, but DMR has had also major issues when it comes to PC performance. This is a terrific video from Modern Vintage Gamer. I'll link it below, where he goes into how the cracked version of Resident Evil 8 actually runs better than the DMR version. Now, they removed the Denuvo, so you'll get this version no matter what now. But Resident Evil 4 starts with, usually games that are just newly released have DMR, and then they slowly take them away once the game sales slow and it's out of the fresh period. But Resident Evil 4 is also suffering from performance issues. Now, unless you're like a major like stickler for this stuff, the average gamer, the average user, someone who like buys a game every year is not going to notice this. But people who are really into performance and getting the most out of their $10,000 or $5,000 break, they'll notice that. And honestly, I agree with them. If you're getting an inferior version of the game, that kind of puts more side into like, why the hell am I having to deal with this when I purchased the game legitimately? Now, sorry. Now, the CEO of Denuvo released this book in order to showcase that their service is essential and that gamers should be happy that this service is there. I know that seems like an oxymoron, but it is. And the only way you can access this is through a business email. I tried using a commercial email, but it wouldn't go through. A friend of mine has a private business. I asked if I could use their email to get access to this, and they said, yeah, sure. So thank you for that. So the threats of game emulation to developers, are you worried enough? Now, what is emulation? Now, I am going to treat this video like you don't know anything about gaming, just to be fully versed of everything I'm stating. So, emulation is basically when your computer, usually, or your Steam Deck, or some sort of third party machine, replicates the function of another machine. For example, the PlayStation 2 or GameCube. So if you want to play Super Mario Double Dash, the only way you can play that game is on a Nintendo GameCube. You need to get a GameCube, the game, and then, I think, did GameCube have HDMI? I'm not sure, but if let's go with Super Nintendo. Say you want to play Super Mario World, and for some reason that game is not available anywhere else but on the NES. You would need to get the console, the game, a monitor or TV that can, output the visuals through whatever components they use. And it's an extremely huge hurdle just to play this game. So emulation will basically replicate the function of an SNES in order for you to play it on, say, a Steam Deck. And you'll download the emulator, then you'll download the ROMs, and that's basically what it is. Even though it has been hard to estimate the precise number of players who emulate Nintendo Switch games on PC, it's easy to find million follower online forums dedicated to emulation and piracy. The fact demonstrates that widespread use of video game emulation, particularly for titles developed or distributed by gaming giants like Nintendo. Game emulation is not necessarily detrimental for legacy reasons. The use of emulators to bring some of the old and nostalgic games back to life on PC is popular, but there's a catch. Pirates can also use emulation to make your licensed games, even the newly released ones, available to the public for free. I mean, yeah, that's actually true. Newly released games are usually cracked very quickly because some of the most intelligent people are working on this stuff. And yeah, like I stated, if you like a product or a service, I do think you should spend money on it, even if it is like, not within your means right now. Because if you want more of that product, more of that stuff, guess what? You gotta kind of pay for it. Let's explore reasons why a huge number of players are so in love with video game emulations, what dangers it brings, how you as a developer can be impacted by it, and what you can do to prevent it from negatively affecting your business. Happy reading. Now, I am going to play devil's advocate for a large portion of this article just to be, as open as possible. I know that's really difficult. I am a gamer, so obviously I should be against emulation. No, I should be for emulation in all shapes and forms, and I am for emulation for games that are not in circulation, that are not available to the public, or require so many hurdles in order to play the game. For example, I just recently played God of War, Chains of Olympus, and Ghosts of Sparta. Now, these games were available through the PlayStation streaming services, but they're no longer available. So I actually had to purchase a copy of the game, get the PlayStation 3 working, and here's another little nitpick. Official PlayStation 3 controllers are the only things that work on God of War Chains of Olympus. If you use a third-party controller, it will not register the second major boss fight with, I forgot what it was, the Persian monster that you fight. You have to rotate the stick. It won't register, which is another hurdle, but nevertheless, it was available on the PlayStation streaming service, so it was taken down for some reason, and now I had to go through all these hoops to play this game on a PlayStation 3, and it was such a nightmare to do it. Not to mention that Sony's streaming service for their games aren't exactly ideal. There's a background noise for their Origins collection for God of War 1 and 2. It's some weird humming noise that comes in the background, and God of War Ascension runs even worse, if you can imagine, on a PlayStation 5 streaming service. Either way, yeah, for games like that, and I'll just name a few right now. Spider-Man Edge of Time, Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, you can't purchase that anywhere. You have to get a physical copy and a console that runs it, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360. Transformers Fall of Cybertron, Transformers War of Cybertron. These are licensed games. Once the license expires, that's it. The games are out of circulation unless the company renews it. In this case, would be Activision. And then finally, there are also extremely rare games like Echo Knight and Rules of Rose, which can go for hundreds of dollars. Heck, Silent Hill 2, the original versions of that game go for hundreds of dollars as well. So in that case, yeah, it's for legacy reasons. But let's go on. I've been going off on a bit of a tangent. So these are the context: video game emulation. What do you need to know? How could a video game emulation have developed at such a rapid pace? Simple purposes to a lucrative industry. What are the downsides of emulation usage for game developers? Emulation poses an economic threat. Oh, that's going to be nice to read. Offering a pirate-able game is not great for brand reputation. The intellectual property right is violated. Should game emulators be accepted? That should be a yes, no matter what. Don't let your game become the next pirated targeted. This sounds like real big fear-mongering for people who are just getting started within the video game industry. Video game emulation is the practice of simulation in any hardware game platform on a computer device. It allows players to play games designed for a console on a PC, tablet, smartphone, and so on. Yeah, that's exactly what I stated. This is feasible with an ADA programs called video game console emulators. These can replicate any console, from home consoles such as the Nintendo Entertainment System, SNES, yada yada yada, handhelds, to hybrid consoles like Nintendo Switch. Yeah. Most emulators are created to reverse engineer the original video game console in order to decode and imitate its operating system. The type of technology is protected by legislation in various countries under U.S. law, for instance. The use of emulators, therefore, is entirely legal and in some cases even done by the console makers themselves to allow for older games to run on newer consoles. Yeah, that's right. You see, just because a game console is more powerful doesn't mean it will run on a modern-day console. For example, Game Pass. Game Pass gives you access to hundreds of titles, but there are some titles that cannot be played on an Xbox Series or because of coding issues. For example, you can't play Alice Madness Returns and Dragon Age 2 or Dragon Age Origins. I know that you can't play those games anymore on the console because the coding is incompatible. If you try and launch the games, it will hard crash and send you back into the dashboard. It used to be able to run, but not anymore. Another game is Alien vs. Predators. That's not on Game Pass, but you can't play it on the console despite them selling it on the Xbox store. But that's not Microsoft's fault. That is up to the publisher in order to update their game, but they're not going to update a 10-year-old game. That's it. Same thing goes for PC as well. I know a lot of people say, well, just get it on PC. Rarely do we get games like Psychonauts. Psychonauts is a game that's a perfect example of being modernized for audiences to play on almost any platform. You can literally download Psychonauts anywhere and play it on any hardware you want. But a game like Manhunt, Manhunt, you can download on Steam. It doesn't work because the game was never intended to work on modern operating systems. So the first section of the game you can't get past without modern support. Yeah, there are people who are willing to help out, just like even with AAA games like Dark Souls, but with Manhunt, it's just a nightmare, which is ironic because it does run on an Xbox Series X and it even has updated frame rate and resolution. Don't know how that even came to being, but thank you for that. So if you want to play Manhunt, go get it on the Xbox. You can get it for cheap, like $5 anyway. But anyway, let's move on. To play a game on an emulator, player needs its digital image, known as a read-only memory. That's a ROM. These files are ripped from the original source, such as a disk or cartridge, and ported onto a new file format. The game, now in a file format, can then be made available to other hardware systems, giving players free access to copyrighted title. For example, Nintendo Switch games can be run on Switch emulator for PCs. Man, he's really going hard on the Switch. ROMs are copyrighted intellectual property. Consequently, unlike emulators, the usage of ROMs, including sharing, downloading, and using them without permission, is illegal. That's right, emulators are not illegal. It's sharing the ROMs that is illegal. That is protected. I remember when there was this NFT bro who was like trying to share playable versions of games that were like kind of like they just put them in on ice, like Blackthorn from Blizzard Entertainment, and they tried to sell it, and their argument was, well, they weren't doing anything with it, so I wanted to sell it. And everyone was just looking at this idiot like, what the hell are you talking about? It's different from abandonware. Like when it comes to abandonware, like Croc, it was an old PlayStation game that you can freely download wherever you want because it's available to everyone. There's no IP holder to that. It's basically fair use at that point. I'm probably using the wrong term, but I'm not a lawyer. The center of legal debate revolves around different perspectives on intellectual property rights for legacy titles that are no longer available for sale, and possibility in outdated formats. This leads to an ongoing debate between game developers, publishers, console makers, and emulation community about whether video game emulation should be accepted or not. Oh no, they should. Look, if a game publisher, developer doesn't want to release their game on a modern hardware, and there's no other way to play the game, like say again the games I listed, the Transformers series, the Spider-Man Edge of Time Shattered Dimension series, the Rule of Rose, Echo Knights, like games that are so rare and inaccessible, why do you care? Like, you're not going to make any money off these games because they're not in production anymore. You didn't put them on your digital store so people can't easily purchase them. People will go for the easier option. Like, downloading a ROM always carries a huge level of risk. I know a lot of people, I know there are a lot of smart people out there who use virtual machines and other leeways to check their systems, but the average user, like myself, we're probably going to get tricked in some way. So it's much safer to buy your games from a legitimate source like PlayStation Store, Xbox Store, Switch, Steam, because guess what? There's less risk that you're going to get ransomware or stuff like that from a legitimate store. As opposed to a ROM, you always get that risk. This is something I've carried on since high school when my teacher told me, is your life worth more than waiting 1 minute for the light to turn red? And I've applied that logic to everything in my life. Is my entire life, which is basically on my computer, like everything that I ever would need, my identity basically, worth more to me than $32 a month? I'm using Adobe as an example because so many people pirate Adobe. I'd rather pay the $32 a month. I'd rather pay the $70 than risk my computer being hacked by some Russian hacker. I would. But if it's not available, like, you're not going to make money off it because people are going to either buy it used from some sort of third-party retailer or from some person on eBay or a flea market, even though now those prices are going up because of, like, artificial scarcity. But either way, if the game is not available, you're not going to make money off it anyway, so why do you even care? From the simple purpose, the original idea behind video game emulators was to create software capable of imitating favorite game consoles, due to the increasingly difficulty in obtaining copies of both old and classic game titles. And discontinued devices using emulators and ROMs has therefore been the only means for gamers to play these types of games. Exactly. This has made it become popular among gamers. Emulation, in my opinion, many players is critical for video game preservation since it extends the life cycle of a game and allows players to easily approach older titles that are no longer accessible on the market. According to this school of thinking, not only emulators harmless, but it also opened up new opportunities to game developers. The emulation community believes that forgotten games can give a second life thanks to emulation, and that developers can use this opportunity to launch sequels and generate more revenue from the reputation and nostalgia attached to these previous titles. Well, it's also, again, game preservation. There are a lot of games that, like when the Wii U shut down, the eShop, the Wii store shut down, the 3DS store shut down. I'm pretty sure there are games on the PlayStation 2 network that were lost to time. There are games that were lost in the PlayStation Vita store when it was shut down. A lot of people had concerns when the PlayStation 3 was going to be shut down. It isn't. You can still like get stuff off it, but it's very restrictive. You still need a PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5 account in order to buy stuff off it. But yeah, all right. To a lucrative industry, but the simple purpose has evolved. Nowadays, not only are older games iconic games emulated, but they are so recently released, but so are the recently released titles. The advantages of game emulation are immensely appealing to any player, whether they own the licensed game or not. First of all, accessing newly released console games is easier than ever. Gamers can enjoy them while purchasing the latest consoles or game licenses. Meanwhile, the others who already purchased the games may still choose to run them on any chosen device due to the advantages gained from extra features. Yeah, like I've seen people who emulate games on the Switch that run at 60 frames, 100 frames per second on Switch emulators. It's just a matter of fact. The Switch is not a powerful console. There are other options, mod and support, so many other abilities. But I don't think this person is addressing the real reason that a lot of people emulate. And let's see if he will. These include thanks to higher frame rate, PC hardware. Instead of restarting the game each time, players can save their current game progress. So, soft saves. The game is considerably simpler to play when players have the option to fast forward and rewind a few seconds of the game. That's not entirely true. No, like some games can't do that even if you emulate them. I think this is overblown, but that's just a trivial objection. By customizing the keyboard controls or connecting any suitable control to their system, players can fully personalize their setup. Well, that's true for any PC game. These are just a few additional features that emulators can offer the player's gaming experience, but it can be a lot more depending on the emulator. Gamers therefore love emulation. The positive reception of players have facilitated video game emulation's evolution beyond its original purpose into a business today. The fact that developers behind the most well-known Switch emulator, Yuzo, earn around 17,000 euros per month on membership fees on Patreon exemplifies this. Now, I do have kind of a problem with that. If you are profiting from a Switch emulator, I don't know how I feel about that because I don't know. Like, if it was free, I have no problem with that. I really don't care. But if you're literally asking for donations, that's a little more sketchy, I feel. Like, Nintendo has some of the most strict lawyers on the planet, so if they haven't found a way to shut this down, then is the Patreon thing still open? Let's see. Oh, it is open. Holy crap, that's a lot of people. So, yeah, if Nintendo hasn't found a way to shut this down, then they must have some strong legal defense against it. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm like, if it was free, like I stated, I would be perfectly okay with it because it's a way to preserve emulation. I guess the other option is that it's for service fees, so people can, they can keep it up and make sure it's running correctly. But does Dolphin have that type of system where they, ask for Patreon support or crowdfunding? I'm not really sure. Like, I don't emulate all games unless I absolutely have to. Like, there's no other way to get the game. But I don't know how I feel about that. I have to think on that. Players adore emulation, but game developers do not. Emulating games may be harmless in some cases, but at the end of the day, it's still a major means of piracy. In recent years, many game giants like Nintendo and Sony, to name a couple, have attempted to stop the rise of emulation. Why do they have to do so? Okay, let's hear the argument. Emulation poses an economic threat. Okay, let's hear this. Players nowadays can access every game made for any system for free, including the most recent ones. That's a little overborne. Like, I wouldn't, like, that seems like fear-mongering. Like, you say, like, at any time, anyone can access any game using emulation. No. I don't think that's true. Again, I'm not an emulation expert, but I don't think that's true. Like, there are a lot of risks that come with emulation and downloading ROMs, like I stated. Is your private information on your computer if you're not using a virtual machine worth the risk of downloading a ROM from the internet? Yeah, there are certain checks and balances, but again, ransomware, malware, all this stuff is becoming increasingly more sophisticated. Some of the most advanced software that's meant for causing havoc is available to the public. We've seen it happen. And there are thousands of YouTube channels that catalog this stuff, and it's very scary stuff when you hear these engineers and security experts talking about this stuff. If you want a good horror film, look up like security vulnerabilities on YouTube when it comes to your personal computer. It'll scare you straight. Pirates will not pass up this opportunity. As a result, many gamers are available for emulation and ready to be freely distributed from the moment of release. Considering the Switch price and strategy, in which games cost as much as €70, many players will go for the free option to have a similar, if not better, experience in the case of Switch emulation. Again, it carries risk with that stuff. Not to mention, like, you run the risk of like Nintendo coming after you because you're pirating the game. Like, yeah, the emulation is not illegal, but you pirated the game, so Nintendo can technically come after you. You always run that risk. You are doing something illegal. And to be honest, I'd rather not be prosecuted by a big company like Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo. That would terrify me. The most prevalent and future titles are emulating player without buying license. It's the greatest economic loss for game developers. Okay, that game developers, I would say game publishers, not developers. Developers are paid a set salary based on the publishers. It's not, no. Unless you're talking about an indie company, that's different, but not a big company like Nintendo. Emulation threatens not only the revenue of new games, but it also that of old and classic ones, because selling retro games is becoming a profitable business for license holders. Nintendo provides legal and licensed emulation through Nintendo's Virtual Console, as well as Switch Online, as an online subscription service exclusively for the Nintendo Switch. The Virtual Console and subscription-based online library gives you access to many old titles for the Wii U, Wii, Switch at full price. Not true. They don't give you full access to every game on the Wii U, Wii, and Switch. For example, that Mario Battle Royale game, you can't access that. They allow players to buy and play games for old systems on modern hardware. Playing those emulators means that players do not need to pay. This is where emulation affects sales revenues, not only for game developers and publishers, but also console makers. Also, no, that's not true. Consoles are sold at a loss. They sell the console in hopes of making back their money through software and other sales like controllers and other external hard drives. So no. Also, just because they offer the service doesn't mean it's ideal. Like, for example, you can't purchase every game off the Nintendo eShop. Sometimes they force you to buy the service. For example, I cannot download a copy of the God of War collection. I can't. I have to pay the $120 for the streaming service, which I think is stupid. I should be able to pay $20 to Sony to buy the God of War collection. But they said no. And since they own the service and the game, I can't do anything about it, which is stupid. And no, they take off games off their digital stores all the time. Like I said, God of War Origins collections, the ones that were on the PC, they took them down. No reason why they took them down. They own the IP, they own the games, they took them down. And the only way you can get them now is literally through the PlayStation 3 store. Like, you literally have to either buy it from the digital PlayStation 3 store, or like what I did and got a physical copy. And even then, you still need like a PlayStation 3 official controller, or it's not going to work for Chains of Olympus. So, no. Like, they're and not to mention, sometimes they release older games in worse states. Look what happened with the 3D All-Stars game. All three of those games, Super Mario 64, Sunshine, and Galaxy, were worse versions than the original games. They were emulated versions that were running at a poorer frame rate. Like, literally, like, they didn't even update the games with wide support or better frame rate, or, like, they had so many issues to the game. And they still didn't, so no, this entire paragraph I disagree with. Offering a pirated-able game is not great for your brand reputation. Because emulators are simply a replica of the original console hardware, not all games operate perfectly on them. Players may encounter issues ranging from small visual glitches to game-breaking crashes, depending on the game and emulator being used. When players' experience are negatively affected, they may first blame the original game's quality, which may not be fair. No, Look, if someone goes online and blames the game quality after they stole it, they're a fucking idiot. You're a fucking idiot. Like, imagine that you stole a bottle of soda from your convenience store. You drank it and you said this sucks, and then you go back to the store owner and said I want my refund. He's like, you didn't pay for that. You stole that. It's like that Steve Jobs meme with the mind explosion. Like, what? Like, I've seen that happen. Like, I remember when Far Cry 3 came out, someone was complaining about a field of view issue within the game. And the guy, one of the Ubisoft programmers said, yeah, because you pirated the game. That's literally something we put into the game for pirated versions. Like, game publishers and developers will actually release ROMs of their game through these types of services, and they'll always have like game breaking bugs or issues. Like Batman had the ability where you couldn't fly at an adequate, you couldn't glide anymore. Alan Wake had like a patch over his eye where it had a pirate symbol on it, and you had to play the rest of the game like that. So if you're stupid enough to pirate the game and then go complain to the developer about it, honestly, that's just free entertainment. You're just an idiot. Additionally, due to popularity, means many emulators have been impersonated by hackers in order to deceive players into downloading a virus or masquerading as an emulator. Yeah, I stated this earlier. Like, at any time when you download a ROM, you're running the risk that that ROM may have malware. Like, every time you try and run this stuff, your computer will literally say, are you sure you want to run this? Yes, there are people who have, like, virtual machines and very high-tech antivirus software, but nothing is foolproof. Now, you can guarantee that there are some, like, hacked versions that run in malware or, like, crypto miners on ROM versions of Resident Evil 4 Remake. Like, I would probably bet my left nut that there isn't one out there that literally is stealing someone's information, has a keylogger, or, like, some sort of malicious intent. Because it's easy. The repercussions on the player side can be huge. Well, that's your own personal responsibility. Like I stated, if your personal computer is worth less to you than the price of the game, which is $70, you run that risk. Like, don't go around saying, oh yeah, this thing stole my entire information and locked me out of my computer. And you go to like a cop or like a judge or something. I'm just, going for a South Park comedic fashion here. I'm just going to say, you go to a judge and you say this, he's going to be like, did you steal the game? It's like, yeah. Then you're in the wrong here. In fact, you may be held with a fine for what you did. Personal details of the impacted player include name, address, phone number. Again, this is his fault. Him or her. If you stole the game, put it on, downloaded a ROM and ran it on an emulator, you always run that risk. That's on you. Take personal accountability. Like, you're not going to be protected from that. Aside from that, the main issue is that utilizing an emulator in a player versus player, P versus P game is no different from any sort of cheating in which the player gains an unfair edge over others. If there are any multiplayer elements, then players playing on a PC have strong advantage by using keyboard and mouse. If the game and its brand are associated with cyber threats and cheating, it will have significant impact on other titles in the future. Look, people buy games. There are people who buy games legitimately and cheat anyway. That's not an argument. Literally, there are people who buy multiple copies of Overwatch when the game first came out. Now it's free to play. When it first came out, there were people who would buy multiple copies of the game just to cheat. There are people out there who make multiple accounts on Fortnite, Apex Legends to cheat. They buy, like, there are losers like that. I think it's stupid, and you are a loser if you buy a game just to cheat on it, just so you can buy another version of the game. I think, like, you have too much money to burn, and your time is not valuable. But that's not an argument either, because literally anyone can cheat in any game using any type of function. There are literally cheats available for everything. The intellectual property right is violated. The largest concern is copyright infringement related to the game's ROM files. Openly releasing these ROMs on the internet for others to download and play, regardless of whether they own a genuine copy of that game, is not allowed. In the instance, game developers' intellectual property rights are breached. This is why Nintendo continuously files lawsuits left and right to fight ROM uploaders to protect the fruits of the developer's labor. Yeah, that's just default. Like, yeah, you're stealing the product. Like if you're stealing the product, they have full right to sue you. It's just the reality of the situation. Like if you go into a Walmart and steal a TV, don't go around saying it's because of anti-capitalist belief or something. You stole the TV because you wanted the TV. Like don't try and sugarcoat it. You stole something, you run the risk of being caught, and if you get caught, you have to pay the consequences. What can I say? That's what it is. Again, I know I'm going really hard on this when it comes to like on the side of corporations, but that is the reality of the situation. You steal something from a corporation, they have a right to seek legal threats against you. It's what it is. Like even if the company doesn't offer the alternative, like I stated for God of War Origins collection, Sony still owns the IP and they still have a right to go after you if you try and steal their product. Just like when that person with the NFTs tried to sell old, outdated games to people as playable NFTs, and the companies went after him. They have their full right too. Just because they're not using it doesn't mean they don't own it. As we've seen, pirates have unfortunately tarnished emulation's original goal of preserving game and heritage. It is fair to say that emulators can be accepted as long as the game developers have complete control of whether or not the game is playable on an emulator. I disagree with that because, let's face it, they're not going to have time for this. Like, that's the always number one thing, time and effort. Like, you really think that a company like Nintendo, Bethesda, I don't know, Saber Interactive, all these big companies are going to, like, dedicate more time into, like, making sure all of this is kosher? They're not. They already have their plate full. Like, labor right now in the United States, at least, that there are people who were once doing one specialized job are not doing 3 or 4 jobs. So that's not going to work either. And most people who work on emulators and ROMs do it just out of gratis. Like I've seen a lot of people, like it's like the modding community. They do this out of just passion most of the time. Yeah, you have some bad actors. You always do. There's always going to be a few rotten apples in the bunch. But for the most part, as far as I can tell, based on my experience of seeing this on the internet and everything, most people are out there to help one another. Like there are people literally out there who are willing to showcase, hey, this is okay, this is okay. So, I mean, I will advocate again that if there is a way to purchase the game legitimately, you should always do that because it's safer, it's better, and it's just, there's a lot less mess involved. In addition, there should always be acceptable length of time where developers get paid for their hard work. It must be up to them to decide when the time is perfect to open up the game to anyone, including emulators. According to Rufus Pollock, a British economist, activist, and social entrepreneur, the optimal period for copying to serve the public interest should be at least 14 years. For gaming? Dude, for gaming? Dude, games are usually forgotten within the next 3 months. Like, Dead Space Remake came out in January, and already everyone moved on to Resident Evil 4, and now Resident Evil 4 is now, like, a lot of people aren't talking about that now. They're talking about Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Like, games move like that. Like, people often forget when, what games come out in January of the same year. I remember a lot of people even forgot Dead Space 3 came out in the year that it came out because it released in January. It's the new game mentality. But 14 years? Dude... Rarely do games even last 1 year. Yeah, you do have your Super Mario 64s and your Resident Evil games, which are very popular within the speedrunning community, but rarely do games last that long in terms of popular appeal. Like, a lot of them start to die out pretty quickly. I don't know. Again, this entire situation has no right answer. This ideal scenario, however, appears to be difficult to archive as pirates use video game emulation as an excuse to rampage on popular titles. That is not fair for game developers since they work hard to build them. Fortunately, there are effective ways of defending the result of laborious effects. This guy is really going hard on game developers when they are paid a set salary. Like, he hasn't even mentioned indie developers. This is 100% big corporations, which are they pay the developers a set salary. They get paid regardless. Like, they don't get yeah, they do have bonuses to incentivize developers to make the best game possible based on sales numbers. And I think they took away the Metacritic thing. There was a Metacritic requirement that a game needed to meet a certain Metacritic score for them to get bonuses. One of the most infamous examples of that was Fallout New Vegas, which missed out on 1 point. And so they didn't get bonuses for that game despite they pulled literally lightning into a jar with that video game. But no, Like, it's not going to pass on to the developers. Not to mention, look, there's it's just an entire messy situation. Like, there's no like right situation for all of this. But this person is painting that all pirates are bad, that all emulation is bad, that all of this affects game developers, the people who actually make the games. When in reality, this is a bottom line corporate number game. It's not meant about the people. It's about money. They'll next game become the next pirated target. It is a pity that emulating any Nintendo Switch game on the PC is easy, and there are almost 4,500 of them available to present. Fortunately, the solution protects your titles against emulation does exist, and you can keep it in your game never-ending list. Al Denuvo. This is a giant advertisement. Hey, look, we can protect you. We can help you. Just purchase our service, and we will do our best. And it definitely will not turn out like this. Denuvo Nintendo Switch Protection helps prevent emulation from get-go and stops pirates from getting a hold of your game via the PC. Yeah, just pay our service. This is one giant advertisement that just paints like pirates as this like sinister cult of people who just want to like hurt the game developers. And look, I do believe that there is a middle ground to this. Like, there are, like, the number one thing this person didn't address, and I think it's something that a lot of people never really take into consideration, is financial situation. There are people out there who will literally want to buy the game. They are good people. They want to buy the game. They want to support, but they can't. They literally are like living, like, especially now in the US, most people live in paycheck to paycheck. There are countries like Brazil and Argentina. I remember when the PlayStation 4 first came out, there were people within my Best Buy who were buying PlayStation 4s just to sell them to people in Brazil because the markup and inflation was so high. I know in Argentina it's so expensive. There are countries who literally will only accept US currency because it's so valuable, or euros or other forms of currency. And some people simply can't afford the game. They want to buy it. And heck, there are also people who pirate the game just to see whether they like it or not. Like, demos are one of the rarest things right now. Back in the day, and this makes me seem like such a boomer, whenever you bought a magazine from, like, PlayStation Magazine, or I think only PlayStation, I don't think Nintendo Power ever did it. But PlayStation Magazine definitely did it, where they would give you a demo disc. And they would have games like Tomb Raider, Zone of the Enders. And I remember me, my cousins, and my brothers, where we would play those demos to get hyped for the game. I played the Sonic Heroes demos so much because it was so much fun. I was super hyped for those games. But nowadays, demos are rare. Yes, you do have technically the Microsoft and Sony return policy, where if you play less than 2 hours of a game within the first month of you purchasing it, you can refund it. No questions asked. And that can technically serve as a demo. You put a timer on your phone for an hour and a half, play the game. If you don't like it, ask for a refund, and they give you a refund. Mostly, I've had one example of them actually going above and beyond for that. Like, I believe it was for Aliens versus Predators, because I had the game for more than a month, decided to play it because I got it for $2, and it didn't work. Like, it wouldn't launch. So Microsoft actually gave me a refund. They were like, yeah, you're right, the game doesn't launch, so we'll give you that. There are rare examples of that. I remember with Bioshock Infinite, there was someone who was like a very dedicated Christian, and he refused to do the baptism, which is in the beginning of the game. You have to go through a baptism, and they gave him a refund based on his religious beliefs. So I would say, like, the biggest thing would be demos to combat that, to give people an option. And again, there are financial situations where people can't afford new games, and it's like a one-a-year treat that they can only purchase one game, and then it ends up being like a Cyberpunk 2077 situation or an Anthem situation. I know I'm going kind of on a tangent because I'm trying to find a middle ground where both sides of the argument can be presided. Because another thing I took out from school, from my college years, is that my professor told me that I don't care if I agree with you or not. I care whether you can argue your point correctly. And the key foundations for an argument is to have a good response to a counter argument. Meaning, anything you state, what will the person state back to you to throw your argument back in your face? And this ebook does very little other than advertise their service and try and paint pirates, ROMs, and emulators as like the demons of gaming industry. This is mostly targeted towards game developers, like indie game developers, most importantly, because Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, they have their own, type of anti-pirate software when it comes to their own company. They're multi-million dollar companies. In the case of Microsoft, multi-billion dollar. Is Sony? I believe Sony's also billion. And you know what? Let's just play it safe. They're all multi-billion dollar corporations. Indie developers, they are much more stretched thin. So I think this is to put more fear towards indie developers. So that's how I see it. I think this is actually just a huge advertisement for Denuvo for them to just get more clients. But I think it's a really poorly argued point. I try to stay in the middle of ground. If you think I was too heavy on one side, let me know. I still think there's no right or wrong answer here. I think there's always a case by case basis. At least that's how I try to take stuff. Anyway, tell me what you think about the whole situation. If you like the video, like it, dislike it if you dislike it. Goodbye.